She was 9 years old. She was carrying a stuffed bunny with one ear. Her feet could not even reach the pedals. And she just landed a Boeing 737 with 143 people inside. 2 F-22 fighter pilots watched the whole thing. Then they looked at her and asked, "Are you the legendary pilot Reborn?" Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The sun was angry that day. It sat high in the Arizona sky like a burning eye, pouring heat down on Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport with a kind of fury that made the air shimmer and dance above the black tarmac. The temperature outside was 118 degrees Fahrenheit. That is not a typo. That is not an exaggeration. 118 degrees. Hot enough to fry an egg on the sidewalk. Hot enough to make your lungs hurt when you breathed. Hot enough to make every single person in that airport deeply, desperately grateful for air conditioning. It was Saturday, August 12, 2023. The time was 3:17 in the afternoon. Gate B7 at Phoenix Sky Harbor was busy. Southwest Airlines Flight 1247 to Denver was boarding, and the gate area looked like controlled chaos, families with too much luggage, businesspeople staring at their phones, college students with giant backpacks slumped in plastic chairs, elderly couples moving slowly and carefully, flight attendants in their blue uniforms looking tired but professional. The departure board above the gate showed the flight was on time. 2 hours to Denver. Nothing special. Just another Saturday afternoon flight on a hot summer day. The aircraft waiting at the gate was a Boeing 737-800. It was painted in Southwest's classic red, yellow, and blue colors. Its engines were quiet now, but they were being checked, fueled, and prepared. Inside, flight attendants were arranging pillows and checking emergency equipment. The cockpit instruments were being tested. Everything was routine. Everything was normal. 143 passengers were boarding Flight 1247. Among them, completely unnoticed by everyone, was a little girl. She was 9 years old. Her name was Sophie Chen. She stood maybe 4 feet tall and weighed about 70 pounds. She had straight dark hair pulled into 2 neat braids that went down past her shoulders. She was wearing a faded purple t-shirt with a small cartoon airplane printed on the front, pink shorts, and sneakers with little lights in the soles that blinked pink and blue every time she took a step. Around her neck, on a bright orange lanyard, hung a laminated card that said, "Unaccompanied minor," in large letters. In her arms, pressed tightly against her chest, was a stuffed bunny. The bunny had once been white, but years of love had turned it a soft cream color. It had button eyes, a little stitched nose, and, this is important, only one ear. The other ear had been lost somewhere, sometime, and had never been found. The bunny's name was Mr. Hops. Sophie walked through the boarding gate with uncertain steps. You could see it in the way she moved. She was doing something scary, and she knew it, and she was trying to be brave about it. The gate agent, a kind woman named Patricia with a silver name tag, walked beside her per Southwest's protocol for unaccompanied minors. Patricia held Sophie's boarding pass and chatted warmly to her about Denver and whether she had family there. Sophie answered politely. Yes, her aunt was picking her up. Yes, she had been on planes before. Yes, she was fine. Thank you. Patricia walked Sophie all the way to seat 12A, the window seat in row 12. She helped Sophie put her small pink backpack in the overhead bin and made sure she was settled before heading back to the gate. Sophie sat down carefully, buckled her seatbelt with practiced hands, and placed Mr. Hops in the middle seat beside her. The man in 12B was a businessman named Gregory. He was in his 40s, with a loosened tie and an expression that suggested he had important things to do and important emails to send and did not have time for complications. When he sat down and saw the little girl in the window seat with the stuffed bunny, he let out a small, audible sigh. Just a quick breath through the nose. The kind of sigh that says, "Great, I'm stuck next to a kid for 2 hours." The teenager in 12C, a boy of about 16 named Jake, took one look at Sophie and immediately put both earbuds in. His message was clear: I am not here. Do not talk to me. I am in my own world. Sophie noticed neither of them. Or if she did, she didn't care. She reached into the small bag at her feet and pulled out a book. It was not a normal book. At first glance, it looked like a children's coloring book. It had a bright cover with colorful drawings. But if you looked more closely, and nobody did, because why would you look closely at a child's coloring book, you would see that the title read, My First Aviation Book, How Airplanes Fly. And if you looked even more closely, you would see that the pages inside were not simple drawings of cartoonish planes. They were technical diagrams. Cross-sections of wings showing how air moves over them to create lift. Detailed drawings of jet engines with all their parts labeled. Cockpit instrument panels with every dial and gauge identified. Approach and landing patterns shown from above. Emergency checklists. Sophie opened this book to a page she had clearly read many times before. The page was worn at the edges and had small pencil notes written in the margins in a child's careful handwriting. She picked up a box of colored pencils and began to color. But she wasn't really coloring for fun. She was studying. Her eyes moved carefully over each diagram. Her lips moved slightly as she read labels and notes. And every so often, very quietly, almost to herself, she would whisper something. Flaps down for landing, she murmured, coloring the wing flaps on a diagram blue. Yoke forward makes the nose go down. Yoke back makes the nose go up. She colored the cockpit diagram green. Altimeter shows how high you are. Airspeed indicator shows how fast you're going. Artificial horizon shows if you're level. She moved to the engine diagram and colored it orange. Throttle forward makes it go faster. Throttle back makes it go slower. She said all of this in the soft, practiced voice of someone who has said these things many times before. Not reading them for the first time. Remembering them. Reinforcing them. Keeping them fresh and ready. Nobody around her paid any attention. The businessman was typing an email. The teenager was listening to music. The rows behind her were filled with people doing exactly what people do on flights, reading, talking, sleeping, watching videos on phones. You yourself were in seat 18D, 3 rows back from Sophie, sitting on the aisle. You had noticed the little girl when she boarded, hard not to, with those blinking sneakers, and you had thought, briefly, poor kid, flying alone, probably scared. And then you had forgotten about her completely. You had absolutely no idea who she was. You had no idea that Sophie Chen was the daughter of Major Lisa Chen, United States Air Force, one of the most gifted fighter pilots in the history of the branch. You had no idea that Major Chen had earned the call sign, Phoenix, because she could recover from situations that would have killed any other pilot. You had no idea that 6 months ago, in January 2023, Major Chen had climbed into an F-22 Raptor for what should have been a routine training flight over Nevada, that the aircraft had suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure at 30,000 feet, and that Major Lisa, Phoenix, Chen had been killed instantly when the plane hit the desert floor. The story had made national news for 3 days before being replaced by something else, as stories always are. And you had absolutely, completely, utterly no idea that before she died, Major Chen had spent 4 years secretly teaching her daughter how to fly. Sophie Chen had her first flying lesson when she was 5 years old. It was a Sunday morning in spring. Major Lisa Chen had the weekend off, a rare thing for an active-duty Air Force pilot. She drove her little daughter to the local municipal airport 20 minutes from their base housing, signed out a small Cessna 172, a simple, reliable, 4-seat light aircraft, the kind used to train private pilots all over the world, and took Sophie up for a fun flight. Sophie was 5. She sat in the co-pilot seat with a borrowed headset that was comically too large for her small head. She watched her mother work the controls with focused, capable hands. And after they had climbed to 3,000 feet and the ground was a patchwork of browns and greens below them, Major Chen said something to her daughter that would change everything. "Want to hold the yoke, baby?" "The what?" "This." Major Chen put her daughter's small hands on the control column, the yoke, that controlled the plane's pitch and roll. "Hold it gently. Don't squeeze. Just feel it." Sophie held it. And she felt it. Later, Major Chen would try many times to explain what happened in that moment, to describe what she saw in her daughter's face. She was never quite able to find the right words. It wasn't just that Sophie liked it, or that Sophie was excited, or that Sophie seemed brave. It was something deeper than that. It was recognition. As if Sophie's hands already knew what to do. As if the aircraft recognized her too. "You're flying now," Major Chen said softly. Sophie looked at her mother. Then looked out the windshield at the sky. "I am." "You are." Sophie didn't scream or laugh or bounce up and down the way most children would. She got very still and very quiet. And she began to pay attention. Over the next 4 years, those Sunday flights continued. Major Chen never put it in any official record. There were no proper logbooks in Sophie's name, no formal training documentation, no FAA knowledge of what was happening. Because what was happening was, strictly speaking, against the regulations. You cannot simply teach a child to fly without proper authorization. Major Chen knew this. She was an experienced military pilot who understood rules and why they existed. But she also understood something else: her daughter had a gift. It was the same gift Major Chen herself had, that rare, instinctive understanding of how aircraft want to move through the air. Most pilots spend hundreds of hours fighting against their instincts, learning to trust their instruments over their feelings. Sophie never had that problem. From her first time holding the yoke, she seemed to understand the plane the way a musician understands an instrument. Not intellectually. Deeper than that. In her hands and her feet and her gut. By the time Sophie was 6, she was actually controlling the Cessna during straight and level flight while her mother monitored every move, ready to intervene in an instant. By the time she was 7, she was doing gentle turns, climbs, and descents. By the time she was 8, she was making full landings, hands and feet on the controls, guiding the small plane down to the runway herself, while her mother sat in the left seat and recorded them in the official logbook under her own name, because Sophie didn't have a logbook and couldn't have one. Sophie made 7 such landings in her 8th year. All successful. All recorded as if Major Chen had made them herself. In total, by the spring before Major Chen died, Sophie had logged 74 hours of actual flight time in real aircraft. Not simulators. Not video games. Real planes, real sky, real consequences. She had learned radio communications, reading weather, emergency procedures, instrument interpretation, approach patterns, and the 1,000 small things that every pilot needs to know but that no 9-year-old is supposed to know. There were moments when Major Chen questioned herself. Late at night, when Sophie was asleep, she would sit at the kitchen table and wonder, is this crazy? Am I putting my daughter in danger? What would people say if they knew? But then she would think about watching her daughter bring a Cessna smoothly down to a runway, the wheels touching with barely a bump, the plane rolling perfectly straight down the center line. And she would think about the way Sophie described what she felt through the controls, not in technical language, but in human language, the way a natural pilot describes it. The plane felt heavy on the left, Mom, so I put in a little right aileron. The nose wanted to drop so I pulled back a little. I could feel when the wheels were about to touch. And she would think, I am not putting her in danger. I am giving her a gift. The gift I was given. The gift that runs in this family's blood. Sophie's father, Captain David Chen, had been a commercial pilot before his death in a car accident in 2020. Sophie had been 3 then, too young to really remember him. But she had his photograph on her nightstand. And she had, apparently, inherited something from him too, this deep and natural connection to the sky. On a cold morning in January 2023, Major Lisa Phoenix Chen climbed into an F-22 Raptor for a training exercise over the Nevada desert. The aircraft had an undetected fault in its hydraulic system. At 30,000 feet, the system failed. The plane became uncontrollable. There was nothing even Phoenix could do. She was 36 years old. Sophie was 8 when it happened. She turned 9 4 months later. After the funeral, after the flag folding and the taps and the rows of uniformed personnel standing at attention, Sophie was sent to live with her aunt, Rachel, in Denver. Rachel was Major Chen's younger sister. She was warm and kind and completely overwhelmed by suddenly becoming the parent of a grieving child. She knew nothing about aviation. She thought Sophie's obsession with airplanes was understandable. Her mother had been a pilot, after all, but she assumed it was grief, a way of staying close to her mother's memory, and that it would fade in time. She had no idea her niece could fly a plane. Sophie had never told anyone. She understood, even at 8 years old, that it was a secret. Her mother had been clear about that. "This is between us," Major Chen had said many times. "Our thing. Our secret. Promise me." "I promise, Mom." And Sophie kept promises. She kept another promise too, the one she had made at her mother's grave, standing in the freezing January wind with tears freezing on her cheeks and Mr. Hops clutched to her chest. "I'll keep flying, Mom. I promise. I'll keep learning. I'll make you proud." Now it was August. 6 months after the crash. Sophie was on Flight 1247 to Denver, going to live with her aunt permanently after a summer visit to her mother's old colleagues and friends. She was studying her aviation coloring book. She was whispering the things her mother had taught her. She was keeping her mother close in the only way she knew how. She had no idea what the next 2 hours would bring. Nobody did. At 4:13 p.m., Southwest Flight 1247 pushed back from Gate B7 and taxied to the runway. At 4:19 p.m., Captain Robert Martinez advanced the throttles and the Boeing 737 accelerated down the runway, nose lifting at 165 miles per hour, climbing into the hot Arizona sky. Captain Martinez was 52 years old and had been flying for Southwest for 26 years. He had 18,000 hours in the air. He had flown through thunderstorms, mechanical issues, medical emergencies, and one memorable incident in 2009 that he preferred not to think about. He was the kind of pilot who made passengers feel safe without them even knowing why: calm, thorough, professional. First Officer Sarah Kim was 31, with 5,800 hours and 8 years at Southwest. She was ambitious and competent and had a reputation for being absolutely unflappable under pressure. She and Martinez had flown together before and worked well as a team. Before the flight, during their pre-departure meal break, both pilots had eaten the catered sandwiches provided by the airline's food service. Turkey on whole wheat. It tasted fine. What they didn't know, what nobody knew yet, was that the food service facility had had a contamination problem 3 days earlier. A salmonella outbreak in their kitchen. Most of the food had been checked and cleared, but one batch of sandwiches had slipped through the inspection process. The bacteria in those sandwiches was an aggressive strain. It had been sitting in those sandwiches, growing quietly, waiting. At 4:38 p.m., 47 minutes into the flight, cruising at 37,000 feet over the New Mexico desert, Captain Martinez put down the flight report he had been reviewing and pressed his hand to his stomach. "Sarah," he said. "I don't feel great." First Officer Kim looked at him. "Nausea?" "Yeah. Sudden. Really bad." He paused. "Are you?" "Yeah," she said, her voice tight. "Me too. Just came on." In the next 3 minutes, they both deteriorated rapidly. This was not ordinary food poisoning, this was a fast-moving case of salmonella poisoning that had progressed to the early stages of septic shock. Fever. Disorientation. Severe vomiting. Their bodies were shutting down at a terrifying speed. At 4:41 p.m., Sarah Kim reached for the radio. Her hand was shaking badly. Her vision was blurring. "I need to call this in," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Martinez nodded, or tried to. His head was spinning. "Mayday," he managed. "Send Mayday." At 4:42 p.m., Captain Robert Martinez, 18,000 hours of experience behind him, 2 hands that had guided aircraft through everything the sky had ever thrown at him, reached for the radio. He pressed the button. His voice came out slow and slurred, barely recognizable. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. Southwest 1247. Both pilots incapacitated. We need." His hand fell from the radio. His head dropped forward. He was unconscious. 6 seconds later, Sarah Kim followed him. Both pilots were slumped in their seats. The cockpit was silent except for the hum of electronics and the steady, indifferent sound of the aircraft cutting through thin air at 480 knots. The Boeing 737 was flying on autopilot at 37,000 feet over the New Mexico desert with 2 unconscious pilots, 143 passengers, and nobody at the controls. Senior Flight Attendant Marcus Webb had been with Southwest Airlines for 12 years. He was 34 years old and had seen a lot of things in those 12 years. Medical emergencies. Unruly passengers. Severe turbulence. Once, a small fire in an overhead bin. He was good in a crisis. He stayed calm when other people panicked. It was one of the reasons he had become senior flight attendant. He had never seen anything like this. Marcus knocked on the cockpit door twice, standard procedure when checking on pilots during flight. No response. He knocked again, harder. Nothing. He used his override code to open the door. Both pilots were unconscious. Head down, not moving. Marcus stood in the cockpit doorway for exactly 2 seconds, the time it took his brain to process what he was seeing and understand its full implications. Then he went to work. He checked both pilots for breathing. They were breathing, but barely, and their skin was burning hot with fever. He grabbed the radio and reported the mayday, giving their position and situation. The voice that came back from Denver Center was controlled, but he could hear the shock underneath it. Then he took a breath. Stepped out of the cockpit. Closed the door behind him. He walked to the front of the cabin and picked up the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said, and something in his voice made every single person on that aircraft stop what they were doing and look up. "We have an emergency situation. Both pilots are unconscious due to a medical emergency. I need anyone with any flying experience, private pilots, student pilots, military pilots, anyone who has had flight simulator training, anyone at all, to identify yourself immediately by raising your hand or standing up." He said it again. Louder. "Anyone who has any experience flying any kind of aircraft, please identify yourself right now." Silence. Then noise, but the wrong kind of noise. Passengers looking at each other with wide eyes. A woman starting to cry. A man saying, "Oh God, oh God." A baby beginning to wail, as if sensing the fear in the air. Phones coming out as people called or texted loved ones. "Please." Marcus said again. "Does anyone on this plane have flying experience?" Nothing. Nobody. Marcus's blood was running cold. He looked down the length of the cabin at 143 frightened people and understood, with terrible clarity, that if nobody responded, they were all going to die when the fuel ran out and the autopilot finally gave up. Then he heard it. A voice. Small. Coming from row 12. So quiet that he almost missed it under the noise of crying passengers. Excuse me." Marcus looked toward row 12. "I can fly." Sitting in seat 12A, with 2 braids and a purple t-shirt and blinking sneakers, holding a one-eared stuffed bunny, was a 9-year-old girl. Marcus's first thought, his immediate, automatic, gut-level thought, was, poor kid. She heard the announcement. She wants to help but she doesn't understand what's happening. He was already beginning to phrase the gentle response he would give her, that "Thank you sweetheart but this is very serious and I need adults to respond," when the girl spoke again. And what she said stopped him completely. "I have 74 flight hours," Sophie said. Her voice was quiet but absolutely steady. "My mom taught me." Her name was Major Lisa Chen, United States Air Force. Her call sign was Phoenix. She died 6 months ago. Before she died, she taught me how to fly. She taught me from when I was 5. I've made 7 real landings. Real planes. Cessna 172s. Not simulators. I know how to use the radio. I know how to read the basic instruments, altimeter, airspeed indicator, artificial horizon. I know emergency procedures. I know this airplane is bigger than what I've flown, but the controls work on the same principles. The yoke controls pitch and roll. The throttles control engine power. The rudder pedals control the tail. I know how to descend. I know how to slow down. I know how to configure for landing with flaps and landing gear. I know I'm 9 years old and I know that sounds impossible. But I am the only person on this plane who knows how to fly it. And if nobody does anything, we are all going to die when the fuel runs out." She paused. Her arms tightened around Mr. Hops. "My mom was the best pilot in the Air Force. She said I was even better than her, which I don't know if that's true, but she said it. And I promised her at her funeral that I would keep flying. That I would keep learning. I don't want to die and I don't want everyone on this plane to die. Please. Let me try. I can do this. I know I can." There was a silence in the cabin that felt like the whole plane was holding its breath. Marcus Webb stared at this 9-year-old girl for a long moment. He was a smart man. He knew that what she was describing was, on the surface, impossible. A 9-year-old could not land a Boeing 737. That was not a thing that happened. But he also noticed several things in the 30 seconds she had been speaking. She had described the controls correctly and specifically. She had named the right instruments. She had used real aviation terminology, not movie version terminology. She knew about flaps and gear and approach procedures. She was not guessing. She was not making things up. She was not a scared child reaching for something to do. She was a trained pilot in a 9-year-old body, making an accurate assessment of the situation and offering a solution. And Marcus had nobody else. He thought about it for maybe 4 more seconds. "Okay," he said. "Let's go." Sophie stood up from seat 12A. She still had Mr. Hops in her arms. She looked down at the businessman, Gregory, who had sighed when she sat down, and saw that he was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. She looked at the teenager in 12C, who had taken out his earbuds and was staring too. She walked up the aisle with Marcus. Her sneakers blinked with every step. Around her, passengers were silent, watching this tiny girl with the stuffed bunny walk toward the cockpit door. Some were still crying. Some had their phones out. Some were praying. One older woman reached out and touched Sophie's arm as she passed. "God bless you, child," the woman said. Sophie nodded and kept walking. At the cockpit door, Marcus entered his code. The door opened. The cockpit smelled of sweat and sickness. Both pilots were slumped forward, breathing but deeply unconscious. The instrument panel stretched across the front of the cockpit, dozens of dials, screens, lights, and switches, all of it at a height designed for adults sitting in adult-sized seats. Sophie stepped into the cockpit and stood in the doorway. For one moment, just one, she looked like what she was. A 9-year-old child. Her eyes were wide. Her chin trembled, just slightly. She looked at the unconscious pilots and she looked at the instrument panel and she looked at the captain's seat, which was enormous compared to her small body. Then she took a slow, deep breath. She pressed her face briefly against Mr. Hobbs's one-eared head. And when she lifted her face, the trembling was gone. "Okay," she said. "I need pillows. A lot of them. To sit on, so I can reach the controls and see over the panel. Can you move that pilot? The one in the captain's seat? He needs to go somewhere safe. And Mr. Hobbs needs to sit in the jump seat behind me. He gets scared when it gets bumpy and I can't be holding him while I'm flying." Marcus nodded slowly. "You're really going to do this?" "I'm really going to do this," Sophie said. "My mom taught me well. I just have to remember what she said." 2 flight attendants came forward. They carefully moved Captain Martinez out of the captain's seat and into the cabin, where passengers helped lay him in an aisle. Marcus and another attendant began gathering every pillow and cushion they could find. They stacked them on the captain's seat, making a kind of small throne for a small pilot. Sophie climbed up. She adjusted herself on the cushions. She could now barely see over the top of the instrument panel, and her feet, even stretched as far as they could go, could not reach the rudder pedals. She studied the pedals for a moment. "I'll tell you when I need rudder," she said to Marcus. "Left or right? And by how much? You press the pedals on the floor there, those ones. Can you do that?" "Yes," Marcus said. He sat down on the floor between the seats, positioning himself by the rudder pedals. "Okay," Sophie said. She settled herself, placed her hands gently on the yoke, and felt the aircraft through it. It was so much larger than a Cessna. Heavier. More powerful. But the basic language was the same trembling of air across control surfaces transmitted through the controls to her hands. "Okay, Mom," she whispered, so quietly that Marcus couldn't hear it. "I'm flying a 737. I know. Crazy. Tell me what to do." She reached for the radio. "Denver Center, this is Southwest 1247. A pause. Then, Southwest 1247, go ahead." Sophie swallowed. "This is Sophie Chen. I'm 9 years old. Both pilots are unconscious from food poisoning. I have taken control of the aircraft. My mother was Major Lisa Chen, United States Air Force, call sign Phoenix. She taught me to fly. I have 74 hours of actual flight time and I have landed planes 7 times. I am asking for help to land this aircraft safely." Dead silence on the radio. Then, very carefully, Southwest 1247. "Did you say 9 years old?" "Yes, sir. 9 years old. But I know how to fly. I need someone to talk me through the approach for Denver International. I can do this but I need help. Please." Another pause. Longer this time. Sophie could almost hear the people on the other end of that radio staring at each other. "Southwest 1247, stand by. We are getting you everything we have. Stand by." In the Denver Center radar room, there was controlled pandemonium. Supervisors were being called. The FAA Operations Center in Washington was being notified. Emergency services at Denver International were being activated. And one of the senior controllers, a man named William Torres who had been doing this job for 22 years, picked up a special phone and made a call. "Get me Buckley," he said. "We need fighters. Now. Buckley Air Force Base, Colorado." The call came in at 4:47 p.m. Commercial aircraft emergency. Both pilots incapacitated. Aircraft being controlled by, and here the base operations officer's voice had gone strange and flat, a 9-year-old child. Major Tyler "Viper" Morrison was in the ready room when the alert came through. He was 38, with 3,200 flight hours in F-22 Raptors, one of the sharpest fighter pilots on the base. He'd been on alert duty since noon, doing paperwork, waiting for a scramble that probably wasn't going to come. It came. He was already pulling on his flight suit as Captain Lisa Hawk Jensen came through the door. Jensen was 33 and had 2,400 hours, fast-tracked through the program because she was one of those pilots who made the instructors nervous, not because she made mistakes, but because she seemed to be thinking 3 steps ahead of everyone else at all times. "What have we got?" Viper asked. Hawk read from the alert printout. Southwest 737. Both pilots down. Food contamination. Aircraft stable on autopilot for now, but someone's going to have to land it. She paused. They say a child has taken the captain's seat. 9 years old. Claims her mother was Major Lisa Chen. Viper's hand stopped on his flight suit. Lisa Chen, he said slowly. Phoenix. Affirmative. She died in January. Crash in Nevada. I know. She had a daughter. Apparently. Hawk set down the printout. And apparently Phoenix taught her to fly. There was a very brief silence. Let's go, Viper said. They crossed the tarmac at a run. 2 F-22 Raptors were already being pulled out, ground crew swarming around them, weapons systems going cold. This was a civilian rescue, not an intercept. They were in the cockpits in 4 minutes. Engine spooling up in 5. Rolling in 6. Buckley, Viper 1 and 2 are airborne, Viper said. Vector us to Southwest 1247. The F-22 is the fastest fighter aircraft in the United States military. It can reach speeds of 1,500 miles per hour. It took Viper and Hawk approximately 4 minutes to locate the Southwest 737 and pull alongside it. Viper came up on the left side of the 737, matching the commercial aircraft's much slower speed. He looked through his canopy at the big plane's cockpit. Through the 737's wide front windows, he could see the instrument panel. And in the captain's seat, barely visible over the top of the panel, was a small dark-haired figure sitting on a stack of cushions. Denver Center, Viper 1, he said. I have visual confirmation. There is a child in the captain's seat. I can see her. This is real. Viper 1, copy. Establish radio contact. Southwest 1247 is on guard. Viper switched frequencies. Southwest 1247, this is Major Tyler Morrison, United States Air Force, call sign Viper. I'm in the F-22 Raptor on your left wing. Can you see me if you look out your left window? A pause. Then a young voice, breathless with something between fear and wonder, yes. I can see you. You're an F-22. Like my mom flew. Viper felt something tighten in his chest. Sophie, he said. Your mother was Major Lisa Phoenix Chen. Yes. She died 6 months ago. In the crash. I know. He took a breath. Sophie, I knew your mother. I flew with her. Not in the same unit, but we crossed paths many times over the years, and everyone in the F-22 community knew Phoenix. She was one of the best pilots any of us ever saw. She had this ability to be in a situation that looked impossible and just find the way out. We all wanted to fly like Phoenix. On the other end of the radio, there was a sound that might have been a quiet sob, quickly controlled. She talked about you, Viper continued. At a dinner, maybe 3 years ago, your mom was talking about her daughter. She said, and I remember this exactly because we all thought she was exaggerating, she said her 9-year-old was going to be a better pilot than she was. We all laughed. She didn't laugh. She meant it. Silence from Sophie. I was at her funeral, Viper said. January. Cold day. I was there too, Sophie said, very quietly. I know. I saw you. You had that bunny. Another silence. Sophie, Viper said, and his voice was very steady and very warm, the voice of someone who has talked frightened pilots back from the edge before. Your mom trained you. 4 years of training. Real flight time. You know things that most student pilots don't know until they've been training for years. You have the gift that Phoenix had. And right now, that gift is needed. You are going to land this aircraft. I am going to be with you every single second. My wingman is on your right side. Denver is scrambling every emergency vehicle they have. You are not alone. You understand? I understand, Sophie said. Her voice was steadier now. Good. Now tell me what your instruments say. Altimeter says 37,000 feet, Sophie said. Good. Airspeed? 480 knots. Perfect. You're reading your instruments correctly. Now, Sophie, we need to descend and reduce speed. Do you know how to descend? Throttle back and push the yoke forward slightly. Exactly. Do it gently. Small movements on a 737 make big changes. Very gentle. Sophie's small hands moved carefully on the throttles, pulling them back just a little. She pushed the yoke forward by perhaps an inch. On the radar screens at Denver Center, the controllers watched the 737's altitude begin to drop. Slowly. Steadily. I'm descending, Sophie reported. Altimeter moving. Rate of descent looks like 800 feet per minute. That's good. That's actually a good rate for where we are. Hold that descent. In the cabin behind Sophie, Marcus Webb was on the intercom with his fellow flight attendants, keeping the situation as calm as possible. Some passengers were still crying. Most had their hands clasped, heads bowed, lips moving. You were in seat 18D, and you had your eyes closed, and you were thinking about the things you wanted to say to the people you loved, and you were also, strangely, impossibly, thinking about that F-22 pilot's voice. The steadiness of it. The certainty. And about the girl in the cockpit, the one with the stuffed bunny and the blinking sneakers, who was right now, at this moment, flying this aircraft. Phoenix, you thought. That's what they called her mother. The daughter was flying. 20 minutes passed as Viper and Sophie worked together, descending slowly through the flight levels. 35,000 feet. 30,000, 25,000. At each level, Viper had Sophie report her instruments. At each level, she reported correctly. Her voice had lost its trembling. She was focused now, in the deep calm that her mother had described, the place good pilots go when everything else falls away and there's only the aircraft and the sky. Sophie, Viper said as they passed through 15,000 feet. Denver Airport is about 40 miles ahead of you now. In a few minutes you'll be able to see the runway. Have you landed at a big airport before? No. Only small municipal airports. The principle is exactly the same. The runway will look very big and very clear. You'll have plenty of space. But before we get there, we need to do some configuration. Are you ready? Ready. First, landing gear. There should be a lever on the center console between the two pilot seats. It'll be labeled 3 positions. Put it in the down position. Sophie's hand found the gear lever. I see it. 3 positions. Down is, a pause, then the heavy mechanical rumble of the landing gear deploying. 3 green lights blinked on. 3 green lights. Gear is down. Perfect. Textbook. Now, flaps. The flap lever is also on the center console. It should be a big lever with detents, click-stop positions. Do you see it? Yes. I see it. Set it to flaps 5. Flaps 5. A pause as Sophie moved the lever. Done. Feel how the plane responds. It's slower. A little more, lumpy feeling. Different air. That's right. That's the increased drag from the flaps. Good. That's exactly what you want to feel. From the right side, Hawk's voice came on the radio. Sophie, this is Hawk. I'm the F-22 on your right. I just want you to know that every controller in Denver Center is rooting for you. The fire trucks are already lining the runway. There are about 100 people at that airport right now whose only job is to help you get down safely. Thank you, Sophie said. A pause. Hawk, that's a good call sign. My mom picked it, Hawk said, and let that sit for a moment. Denver International Airport came into view at 8,000 feet. Through the large front windows of the 737, Sophie saw it first as lights, hundreds of lights marking the runways and taxiways, then the long gray-white strip of runway 34 extending toward her like an invitation. I see it, she said, and for the first time her voice contained something that might almost have been wonder. I see the runway. Runway 34, Viper said. 14,000 feet long. Wide as a highway. You have plenty of room. Now, we're going to slow down more and put in more flaps. Listen carefully. For the next 6 minutes, Viper walked Sophie through the approach configuration step by step. More flaps. Speed reduction. Altitude management. Every step, Sophie executed correctly, reporting her instruments, asking questions when she wasn't sure, making adjustments when Viper asked. She was working, Marcus could see from his position on the cockpit floor, with total focus. Her eyes moved constantly, instrument panel, out the window, instrument panel, out the window. Her hands made small, precise movements on the yoke. At 2,000 feet, Viper said, 5 miles to the runway. You're looking good. Speed is 155 knots. Altitude is good. You're on the centerline. How does it feel? The plane feels heavy, Sophie said. Not bad heavy. Just. I can feel the weight. Different from a Cessna. That's right. And that heaviness is going to help you make a smooth landing. More weight means more momentum, and momentum means you'll settle onto the runway nicely if you do your flare correctly. Tell me about flare. When I get close to the runway, about 50 feet, I pull back gently on the yoke. It lifts the nose. The main wheels touch first. Then I ease the nose down. Exactly right. Exactly like your Cessna landings. Same technique, bigger plane. Marcus, are you ready on those brake pedals? Marcus, sitting on the floor, hands on the rudder pedals, said, ready. Okay, Sophie. 3 miles. 1,000 feet. Sophie's hands were steady on the yoke. Her eyes were on the runway. Flaps 30, Viper said. Flaps 30. The lever moved. The plane responded, slowing further, settling into its approach attitude. Looking perfect. 2 miles. The runway was huge now in the windows. So much bigger than the little airstrip Sophie had landed on before. The approach lights were flashing in their sequence, leading her in like a lit path. The threshold lights were white, then red on the sides. 1 mile. 500 feet. Speed 145 knots. Viper is staying with you until you cross the threshold, then we're pulling up. You'll land alone. But you're ready. Are you ready? I'm ready, Sophie said. Mom taught me. I remember everything. Behind her, through the closed cockpit door, she could hear the cabin. It was very quiet now. No more crying. People were silent. Waiting. You were in seat 18D with your seatbelt so tight it was leaving marks. Your hands were gripping the armrests. You were staring out the window and you could see the ground coming up and you were thinking you have never in your life wanted anything as much as you wanted this little girl with her stuffed bunny to land this plane. 500 feet, Viper said. Sophie could see the individual runway markings now. The big white numbers, 34, at the threshold. 300 feet. You're right on the glide path. Perfect approach. Speed is good. She made a tiny correction with the yoke. The plane responded smoothly. 200 feet. The ground was rushing up now, the way it always does in the final moments of a landing, slowly at first and then all at once. 100 feet. Start thinking about your flare. Her hands tightened slightly on the yoke. 75 feet. The runway was right there. Right there. 50 feet, flare, Sophie. Flare now. Sophie pulled back on the yoke. Gently. The way her mother had shown her, in a little Cessna over a small runway somewhere in the American Southwest, the sun going down and making the sky pink and orange and her mother's voice saying, "Feel it. Don't force it. Just guide it. Let the plane land. Help it." The nose of the 737 came up. Outside, a massive aircraft that should only be flown by trained adult professionals with hundreds of hours on type began to settle toward the runway in a perfect, textbook flare. And then, the main gear touched. Bang. Hard. But solid. Not a crash. A landing. The right main and left main wheels hit the runway almost simultaneously, a slight right first sequence that caused a small amount of swerving. Marcus hit the right brake pedal on Sophie's call of right rudder, and the aircraft straightened out. Nose gear down. Viper's voice came over the radio, and he was not calm anymore. His voice was cracking with something that sounded like disbelief and joy and relief all at once. Brakes. Brakes now. Marcus pressed both brake pedals hard to the floor. Sophie pushed forward on the yoke, putting the nose gear firmly on the ground. The 737 decelerated. The runway numbers blurred past. The end of the runway, which had seemed impossibly close, began to recede as the aircraft slowed. 100 knots. 80 knots. 60 knots. 40, 20. Stop. The aircraft sat on runway 34 at Denver International Airport, completely stationary. There was 1 second of absolute, perfect silence. Then Sophie Chen, 9 years old, braids and all, let out a sound that was half laugh and half sob and completely, entirely human. "We did it. We're down. We did it." The fire trucks were there in seconds. The paramedics were through the doors in minutes. Both Captain Martinez and First Officer Kim were loaded into ambulances and rushed to Denver General. They would both survive. It would be touch and go for the first 24 hours, but they would make full recoveries. All 143 passengers evacuated the aircraft via the emergency slides. Some walked off the plane in a daze, blinking in the late afternoon Colorado sunshine. Some collapsed into the arms of emergency workers. Many cried. One man fell to his knees on the tarmac and stayed there. People called their families, saying the sentences you only say when you have just not died: "I'm okay. I love you. I'm okay." Sophie was the last person to leave the cockpit. She came through the cabin with Mr. Hops under one arm, walking past all the empty seats, the forgotten belongings, the abandoned phones and books and half-eaten snacks, to the front of the plane. Marcus walked beside her. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say yet. At the front door, Sophie looked out at the tarmac, at the fire trucks, the ambulances, the police cars, the airport authority vehicles, the crowd of emergency workers, and beyond them a line of media helicopters beginning to hover over the airport perimeter. She stepped out and walked down the air stairs. At the bottom, she stopped. 2 F-22 Raptors sat on the taxiway perhaps 200 yards away. They had landed while Sophie was still bringing the 737 to a stop. Their canopies were open. 2 figures in flight suits were walking across the tarmac toward her. Viper and Hawk walked up to Sophie Chen and stopped. Viper knelt down. Not to talk down to her. To be at her level. To look her in the eye. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with a square jaw and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. His eyes right now were wet. "Sophie Chen," he said. "You just landed a Boeing 737. You were the sole person in command of that aircraft and you brought it down safely and you saved the lives of 143 people. You are 9 years old." "My mom taught me," Sophie said. "I know she did." He paused. "I've flown thousands of hours. I've done things in aircraft that most pilots only see in movies. And what I just watched you do, talked you through on the radio, is one of the most remarkable things I have ever seen." Hawk stepped forward. She was quiet for a moment, looking at Sophie with an expression that was hard to read. There was admiration in it, and grief, and something else. "Your mom's call sign was Phoenix," Hawk said finally. "Do you know what a phoenix is?" "A bird that dies and comes back from the fire," Sophie said. "That's right. Lisa Chen was called Phoenix because she could come back from any situation. She never gave up. She always found a way." Hawk looked at the 737 sitting on the runway, and then back at Sophie. "And Sophie, she's still here. In you." Viper put his hand gently on Sophie's shoulder. "People are going to ask about today for a long time. They're going to ask how a 9-year-old landed a passenger jet. They're going to look for explanations. And I'll tell you what I think the real explanation is." Sophie looked at him. "Your mother didn't just teach you to fly," Viper said. "She gave you a piece of herself. Her talent. Her ability. Her refusal to give up. Phoenix died in January. But today, Phoenix landed a 737. Sophie's chin was trembling. Her eyes were full. "They're going to call you the legendary pilot Reborn," Viper said quietly. "And Sophie?" "They're right." Sophie buried her face in Mr. Hops and cried. By 6 p.m. that evening, the story was everywhere. 9-year-old girl lands Southwest Airlines 737, saves 143 lives, that was the headline on every major network. By midnight, it had been translated into 47 languages. By morning, Sophie's face was on the front page of every newspaper in America. The aviation world reacted with a kind of stunned disbelief that gradually gave way to something like awe. Pilots and aviation experts went on television and radio and tried to explain how impossible it was, a 9-year-old in a type-rated aircraft she had never flown before, executing a successful landing, and they could not find adequate words. The numbers didn't add up. The physics seemed wrong. And yet it had happened. The Air Force released a brief statement acknowledging that Major Lisa Phoenix Chen had been one of their most gifted pilots and expressing pride that her legacy had saved lives. The statement carefully said nothing about the legality or illegality of what Major Chen had done with her daughter on all those Sunday mornings. The FAA investigation was thorough and took 3 months. They interviewed everyone on the flight, examined the aircraft, reviewed the radio recordings, and looked very carefully at what Major Chen had actually done in those 4 years of informal training. Their final report acknowledged, in careful bureaucratic language, that what Major Chen had done was against FAA regulations, unauthorized flight instruction to an individual without proper certification, in aircraft registered under her name but operated in ways that violated the terms of their certification. The report also said, while we cannot officially condone unauthorized flight instruction, it is impossible to overlook the fact that Major Chen's decision to train her daughter resulted directly in the preservation of 143 lives. This case presents a unique and profound challenge to our existing regulatory framework, and we will be examining these questions as part of ongoing policy review. In other words, it was wrong. It also saved everyone. We'll figure out what to say about that later. Southwest Airlines sent Sophie a letter. It was personal, signed by the CEO, and it said things that do not need to be repeated here but that made Sophie cry when she read it. The 2 pilots, Martinez and Kim, both recovering well, called her separately. Martinez cried on the phone. Kim asked if Sophie wanted to visit the airline's flight simulator sometime when she was feeling up to it. Yes, Sophie said. Very much. Sophie moved into her Aunt Rachel's house in Denver in September. Rachel was overwhelmed. She had already been overwhelmed, before all this. Now she was caring for the most famous 9-year-old in the world, fielding requests for interviews and TV appearances and book deals and movie rights, all of which she politely declined on Sophie's behalf because Sophie was 9 and needed to go to school and be a child. The offers from the aviation world were different. Those, Rachel thought about. The Air Force reached out, not officially, but through Viper, who had called personally. If Sophie wanted, when she turned 18, there would be a scholarship. A path. A door left open for her. No pressure. Just an open door. Several airlines made similar offers: simulator time now, mentorship, a path into professional aviation when she was old enough. Sophie's response, when her aunt relayed all of these offers to her, was characteristically Sophie. "Thank you," she said. "I'm going to keep learning. I'm going to study aviation and keep learning everything I can. Because I promised Mom I would." A pause. "But right now, I'm 9. I don't want to be famous right now. I want to go to school and have friends and be normal for a little while. Is that okay?" Rachel hugged her. "That's more than okay," she said. "That's perfect." Sophie started 4th grade at Denver Elementary School in September. She made friends, slower than some kids, because she was quiet and thoughtful, but real friendships, the lasting kind. She got good grades. She played soccer on Saturdays, terrible but enthusiastic. She read everything she could find about aviation. She watched every documentary about flight she could access. She built model aircraft on her bedroom floor. She still had Mr. Hops. He lived on her pillow. She still had her aviation coloring book. But she had finished coloring it. She had gotten a new one, more advanced, with real cockpit procedures. She kept her promise to her mother every single day. 6 months after the landing, on a cold February morning in 2024, Sophie asked Rachel to drive her to the cemetery outside Phoenix where Major Lisa Chen was buried. They drove the 2 hours mostly in silence. Sophie sat in the back seat with Mr. Hops in her lap, watching the desert landscape pass outside the window. She was thinking about things she didn't have words for yet. The way her mother's voice had sounded during their flying lessons, patient, warm, precise. The weight of the yoke under her hands. The moment the wheels of the 737 touched down. The way it had felt to do the thing her mother had trained her for, in the exact moment when it was needed. The grave was in a quiet part of the cemetery, under a single tree that had turned a pale gold in the February cold. There was a military headstone, white marble, neat letters. Major Lisa, Phoenix, Chen. Dates. U.S. Air Force. Beloved Mother. Sophie stood in front of the stone for a long moment. Then she knelt down and placed the flowers she had brought, simple ones, yellow, her mother's favorite, in the small vase at the base of the stone. Next to the flowers she placed 2 other things. The first was her unaccompanied minor lanyard from Flight 1247. The orange laminated card, a little creased now, that had hung around her neck when she boarded as just another kid flying between divorced parents, nobody important, completely forgettable. The second was a photograph. It was printed on regular paper and slightly blurry, a cell phone photo taken by a paramedic at Denver International, but it was clear enough. It showed the cockpit of a Boeing 737. And in the captain's seat, sitting on a stack of pillows and cushions, was a little girl with dark braids and a purple t-shirt. She was holding a one-eared stuffed bunny. She was smiling. Not a performance smile. A real one, the smile of someone who has just done something they didn't fully believe they could do until the moment they did it. Sophie pressed her hand flat against the cold marble of the headstone. "Hi Mom," she said. Her voice was steady. "I flew." The wind moved through the yellow tree branches, making a quiet sound. "I flew the 737. I know. It's crazy. I didn't believe I could do it. But I remembered everything you taught me. Every single thing. And it worked, Mom. It all worked. She paused. 143 people. They all went home to their families because of what you taught me. Because of all those Sunday mornings. I hope you know that. She was quiet for a moment. Viper told me that people are calling me the legendary pilot Reborn. He said they mean you're reborn in me. I don't know if that's true. But I think you are in me. Not just the flying. The way I think about flying. The way I feel it. That's you, Mom. That's what you gave me. The February sun moved out from behind a cloud, warming her face for a moment. I'm going to keep learning. I'm going to be a pilot when I grow up. A real one, with proper training and a real logbook in my name. And someday, maybe, if I work really hard, I'll be half as good as you were. She smiled, just slightly. Or maybe a little better. You always said I would be. She stood up. Brushed the grass off her knees. Call sign Phoenix, she said. That was you. And someday, when I'm ready, when I've earned it, it'll be me too. I'm going to make you proud. I promise. And you know I keep my promises. She took one long, last look at the stone. Then she turned and walked back toward Rachel's car. Overhead, in the blue Arizona sky, a small plane was flying, a Cessna, from the look of it, climbing out of some nearby airstrip, its engine a distant hum. Sophie stopped walking and looked up at it. She watched it bank gently to the left, catching the morning sun on its wings. She smiled. Someday, that would be her again. Not in 9 years. Not in 30 years. In her heart, in the deepest part of her, the part her mother had shaped and trained and loved into existence, right now. Always. Phoenix's daughter. The legendary pilot reborn. Sophie Chen turned 9 months ago and already had a story that would be told for 100 years. But right now, in this moment, she was just a kid in a Colorado cemetery, holding a stuffed bunny with one ear, watching a little plane cross the morning sky. She watched until it disappeared. Then she got in the car and went home.